Welcome to Books in Five, where we interview the authors of recently published books on relevant topics. We'll be asking the author 5 questions, and they will have 5 minutes to answer each one. I'm very excited about my guest today, as he has written an eye-opening new book showcasing the need to transform America's voting system. Bradley, thank you so much for joining us today. Please tell us your name, the title of your book, and a little bit more about your background.
Sure. My name is Bradley Tusk. This book is called Vote with Your Phone: Why Mobile Voting is Our Final Shot at Saving Democracy. And my background is a mix of I've worked in government and politics, in tech and venture capital. I happen to own a bookstore in New York City. And then this work that we do in mobile voting actually comes out of my foundation.
Great. Let's begin with question number 1. Your book begins with an overview of the American system of democracy and government, which you describe as broken. Help
Yes.
us understand why people have lost faith in the system as it has developed into the present day.
Yeah. So to work backwards, people have lost faith, very rightfully so, because there's not a lot to have faith in, right? So the question is, why and what produced that? So the underlying thesis of mobile voting, but really the underlying thesis of my whole career, what I learned in my time in government and politics, and just for context, I really kind of saw it from every angle, right? I was Mike Bloomberg's campaign manager. He ran for mayor of New York City. I worked for him at City Hall. I also spent another 5 years in city government in different ways. I was the deputy governor of Illinois for 4 years. I ran the state's budget, operations, legislation, policy, and communications. And so I kind of saw what state government was all about. I worked in Congress. I was the communications director for Chuck Schumer in the U.S. Senate for 2 years. And so I really got to see it from every angle. And the thing I took away from it simply is virtually every politician makes every decision solely based on winning the next election and nothing else. And yes, there are some exceptions. In my career, Mike Bloomberg was one of those exceptions. But by and large, that's who runs for office. So the problem with that is not that they want to keep their jobs or they're self-interested. Most people want to keep their jobs. We're all self-interested. But it's the incentives that govern their choices. So in the US, at least, gerrymandering, which is a corrupt practice that allows the two political parties to basically draw up their own legislative districts, means that the only election that ever really matters is the primary. So something like 92% of congressional races are decided in the primary, 93% of state legislative races are really effectively decided in the primary, meaning the general is non-competitive, and whoever wins the primary is going to win, whether it's a safe Republican seat or a safe Democratic seat. And primary turnout in this country is really low. It tends to be about 10 to 15% most elections. So who are those voters? They're typically the far right or the far left or special interests that know how to move money and votes in low turnout elections. And as a result, that only decides who wins office, but then what those people do once they're in office, because they want to stay in office. And so that gets us one of two types of government: either the chaos and dysfunction that we call Washington, D.C., or totally one-sided governments, whether it's the city of San Francisco on the left or the state of Texas on the right. And it shouldn't have to be that way, but because it is, we now have a government that is in no way aligned with the people, right? We have a government that is really responding to the extremes on either side, that's responding to individual special interests on either side. And that's it. And so the American people, I think, are rightfully very, very distrustful of their government, because when they ask themselves, is my congressman, is my state senator, is my mayor, is my governor, whoever it is, are they looking out for me? The answer is no, right? They're looking out for themselves. And that's probably always been true. My guess is the kind of people who ran for the Senate in the Greek days and the Roman days is probably not that different from a personality standpoint than the people who run for Senate today here in the U.S. or wherever else. But at the same time, until now, they had a political incentive to try to represent the mainstream, and that meant doing what the mainstream wants, which is to solve actual problems, compromise, find consensus, work together. And today, if you dare to work with the other party, typically you're seen as a traitor, and you're going to get a primary from the extremes in your own party. And so as a result, people don't do it. And as a result of that, it is very hard to get anything meaningful done. And so people have a lot of distrust. And quite frankly, we've been in this cycle now for over 60 years. I think there was a period up until the 1960s where, even though society was incredibly flawed in many ways, leading with the fact that many, many people did not basically have basic or equal rights, there was broader trust in institutions overall, whether it was government or media or higher ed or Wall Street or the church. And then I think the Vietnam War was kind of the beginning of the end, where all of a sudden you had a war that the government was consistently lying to people about, combined with the fact that television was this new medium for getting things across. And so they're being lied to on television. And the combination of those two things really started to breed this mistrust, and that bled into Watergate. And it's kind of gone downhill ever since.
Bradley, let's move on to our second question. The people are supposed to choose their leaders through free and fair elections, but you write about how the way that voting actually operates makes it difficult. Why is voting so hard, and how have reformers tried to improve it over the years?
Yeah. I mean, voting is, but first of all, it's deliberately hard. And it's deliberately hard not because elected officials think that it should be some great privilege and they want you to have to sort of earn it, but because they don't want you to vote in the first place, right? They like the idea of really low turnout because they know who those voters are. And if they can effectively control who's going to turn out, and those are the people who they already know to be responsive to, then their odds of losing go way down. And so, look, first thing is, there are lots of parts of this country we still make people have to go somewhere to vote. And, look, in a presidential election, that seems to work. Turnout's usually about 66% in most presidential elections. But outside of that, it doesn't work at all, right? And why? Because people are busy. They have lives. Like most people I know aren't going to not take their kid to school on a Tuesday so they could vote in the state Senate primary, or the state rep primary, or whatever it is. And they have jobs and they just have too much going on. And so they really don't do it. They might sort of mean to do it, but just the numbers show they don't. And so we make it really difficult. We do that deliberately. So that keeps turnout low. That creates all of the misincentives that allows us to sort of, fall into total dysfunction, disrepair like we're in right now. And, there have been efforts to make it better, and some of them have worked. But for example, vote by mail is, I think, a really good thing. I think it doesn't necessarily fit today's society as well. I'll give you a quick anecdote. When my daughter last year, she was a freshman in college, and when we dropped her off, they gave her a room key, they gave her a bike room key, but mailbox key never once came up. And then a few weeks later, because she had just turned 18, she sent me a text saying, "Oh, I can vote for the first time. How do I do it?" And I sent her a link for an New York City absentee ballot. We live in New York City. But she thinks email is antiquated, let alone sort of actual mail, right? Like they didn't even bother to they don't even orientation give you a mailroom key, right? So the idea that, we live in a world now where most of us basically check our mail once a week, once every 2 weeks. It's not how we live today, right? So vote by mail, I think, was a really good innovation a long time ago, and it's worth continuing for sure. But the reality is today we live on our phones, right? 97% of Americans under the age of 50 have a smartphone. It's even close to 80% of people above the age of 65. And if we made that an additional way to vote, so keep vote by mail, keep voting in person, but give people also the ability to vote securely from their phones, then you could really reach people where they are. And then you can get turnout in that state Senate primary from 8% to 32%. And I'll give you a concrete example of why it matters. About 6 years ago, Amazon wanted to open up a second headquarters. They had this big nationwide competition. Every city competed for it. And New York City was one of the winners. And they wanted to put their headquarters in Queens. And normally speaking, that's a great thing, 40,000 new jobs. And, New Yorkers were really exciting. The polling showed that. You could tell people were really into it. But then AOC comes out against it. And she did that because her politics are to be anti-capitalism, anti-business, anti-technology, whatever else, fine. And it comes down to this guy named Mike Gianaris. And Mike Gianaris is just a guy. He's a state senator from Queens, from that neighborhood. And he's not conservative. He's not liberal. He's not evil. He's not good. He's just a politician. And Mike Gianaris says to himself, normally, of course, I'd be for all these jobs. Of course, I'd want that. It's good for my district. But if I now support this deal, I could get a primary from the left. And based on historical data, my turnout would be around 10%. And who would those voters be? The most left-wing voters in my district. And if AOC ran someone against me, I could lose. And so ultimately, Mike Gianaris had a choice: 40,000 new good-paying jobs for New Yorkers, or one job, his own, and he picked himself. And there's never a world where the Mike Gianarises of the world are going to be less selfish. Again, that's who runs for office. But if turnout was going to be 37% in his primary instead of 10, just by definition, he would have to have done the deal because the majority of people really liked it. They wanted the jobs. And so we have politicians making really perverse decisions that are not in the interest of the public simply because turnout is so low. They're never going to change. They're never going to become better people. They're never going to sacrifice their own well-being just to get something done. But if we can align our political incentives, and our just means the mainstreams, with our policy incentives with their political incentives, then you can get things done.
Bradley, let's move on to our third question. The central thesis of your book is that people should be able to vote with their phone because it solves many of the issues that we have been discussing. Can you describe for us how the mobile voting project came to be and what the opportunities and challenges are to implement it?
Sure. So after I spent a lot of time in politics, I pivoted to tech. And one of the first things I did was I ran a lot of the campaigns around the US to legalize Uber. And at the time, we were this tiny, tiny little tech startup, and taxi was this very powerful industry. And therefore, they had sort of the attention of all the politicians who were then trying to use regulation to put us out of business. But we had customers who really, really liked the product. And we put functionality in the app itself that said, look, if you want to be able to keep using Uber, you got to tell your elected officials because they're going to take it away from you and then you won't be able to do it again. And we made it really easy. We let them advocate directly from the app. And millions of people did. And they told their local elected officials, their city council members, their mayors, like, hey, leave this thing alone. And before we were talking about shifting incentives, the underlying incentives for the politicians shifted because all things being equal, normally they would do what the taxi industry wants because they get campaign contributions from the taxi industry. But all of a sudden, you're a city council member and 6,000 people from your district all reached out to you in some way to say, please leave this alone. Then all of a sudden, the campaign contribution doesn't matter at all. You're not going to risk angering all of those potential voters who could vote against you. And so we won in every single jurisdiction in the country. And at some point along the way, it kind of hit me like the same people who were advocating for us probably have no idea who their city council member even is, right? Because the truth is, just based on primary turnout, they don't vote in most elections. And then that led to the obvious question of like, well, what if they could do it from their phones, just like they're doing this? Would that be different? And that's what led to the mobile voting project, which we created and announced out of my foundation in 2017. And the first thing we did was test the hypothesis, which was if you make voting easier, will more people do it? And so we paid for elections in 7 different states, red and blue, where people with disabilities or deployed military were able to vote in real elections on their phones. We used the tech that existed at the time. And it worked. A lot more people did it. So, for example, in Seattle, the conservation district, and after we made it available 2 cycles in a row, turnout tripled. Denver did a poll. People participated in their mobile voting election. 100% said, yeah, I'd rather press a button than have to go somewhere. Almost would have been shocking if they didn't say that. And so we knew that, okay, the hypothesis is right. How do you build technology that is at scale secure so that millions and millions and millions of people can use it and it'll work? And so we spent the last 4 years at the Mobile Voting Project building our own mobile voting technology. This is totally philanthropic. I've put $20 million of my own money into this so far. We are just about done. And when it is all done, all of the code will be on GitHub and it will be free for anyone to grab and anyone to use. And real simply, the way it works is, I'll use New York City since I live here and I'm sitting here doing the podcast. I go on the App Store, I download the New York City Board of Elections app. First thing they do is say, okay, is Bradley really a registered voter in New York City? Put in my information, fine. Next question, is Bradley really Bradley? So the first thing they do is multi-factor authentication. So that's like when you forget your Google password, your Amazon password, they send you a code and you put it in the app and that authenticates that you're you. We do that and we do biometric screening. So that's like clear at the airport, scan of your face, match it up against your driver's license. Okay, we've established that Bradley is really Bradley. The ballot comes up on my screen. Ballot itself, very simple, very straightforward. But as I go through it, once I hit submit, 3 things happen. 1, my ballot is immediately encrypted. 2, it's anonymized. And 3, I get a tracking code like if it were a FedEx package so I can track the progress of my ballot. It goes back to the New York City Board of Elections and they air gap it, which means they take it offline. And once my ballot is no longer connected to the internet, that's when they decrypt it. A paper copy gets printed out. That gets mixed in with all of the other ballots. I can see where my ballot stands for the tracking code. And the underlying code itself is totally open source, which means it's completely transparent. Anybody can verify it. Anybody can audit it. And so that's phase 2. And then phase 3 is where we're entering now, which is going to be the really hard part. which is giving people the ability and the right to actually vote on their phone in elections. So we are starting to run legislation this fall in different cities around the US that would allow people to use their phone to vote in local elections. So mayor, city council, school board, things like that. And my hope is that we can prove that it works and then kind of scale our way up from there.
Bradley, let's move on to our fourth question. The section of your book that I enjoyed the most was the personal essays from a contingent of leaders who strongly support mobile voting. Tell us more about their perspectives and why you felt it was necessary to include their voice.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you to all the people who did contribute, and there's a bunch of great essays. They're typically like 4 or 5 pages each, so they're not that long. And we just asked different people that we'd really been working with. So it kind of ranges from Martin Luther King III to Mark Riccobono, who's the president of the National Federation for the Blind, to Cisco Aguilar, who is the Secretary of State for Nevada, to U.S. Congressman Josh Gottheimer, and many others. Some people on the security side, some people on the election reform side. And we just wanted their perspective as to sort of, what do they think the problems are with the current system? And why do they think that mobile voting would be a way to fix it? And we were really lucky that they all wanted to participate. And so we have, about 10 guest essays in the book. And yeah, those are people who are really important allies for us. And as we go through the legislative process now over the many years to come, they are people who will be turning to frequently to help us make the case publicly, make it in hearings, make it in op-eds, make it on TV, on social media, and hopefully they are the basis for the beginnings of our movement.
Got it. Let's maybe use one of those examples to really highlight why mobile voting is necessary. So I know you just brought up the leader for the blind community. Can you talk a little bit more about how they will benefit from mobile voting?
Yeah, I mean, just imagine this. So we find voting to be a pain in the ass, and that we find it to be a pain in the ass because we don't do it, right? And so imagine if you can't see. You still might have to go to the polling place. You have all the trouble of getting there and all of the effort it takes to just live life when you're blind. And then when you get there, you tell them who you want them to cast the ballot for, and you have to trust that they did it. For all you know, you told them Biden and they put Trump, or you told them Trump and they put Biden, or whatever it is. And so, the privacy, the anonymity, the security, not to mention just the effort itself, is so much greater, and the risk is so much greater for people who are blind than for the rest of us. And yet when the smartphone came along, it was a revolutionary tool for the blind community because so many tasks that were normally so hard to do could be done a lot more easily on their phone. And voting is one of those.
We have about 2 more minutes for this question. So you're really trying to, build a coalition that can enact reform, right? So how do you go about balancing the different leaders that you're in communication with? Because obviously they want reform, but yeah, go ahead.
We're going to need all of them, to be perfectly honest. So we're going to need a lot of Gen Z, and there's a couple different essays from Gen Z leaders in the book. We're going to need people from the military. We're going to need people from the disability community, people from the civil rights community. We're going to need as many people as we can for the simple reason that it's going to be a real fight, simply because even though voting with your phone to most people makes total sense, and when you explain the security measures, they realize it's significantly more secure than the ways we vote now. If you're in power, you don't want to lose power. And you even might like the idea of not being held hostage by the extremes. But when the risk that poses is you're going to have, 3 times as many people voting in your next primary, that may really scare you because you might say, I'm comfortable with what I have and I don't want to risk it. And so your instinct might be to say no. And that happens to a lot of election reforms. And so we're going to have, a really big fight on our hands because we're going to have opposition from the status quo on both sides of the aisle. We're going to have opposition from Republicans. We're going to have opposition from Democrats. We're going to have opposition from unions. We're going to have opposition from business groups, opposition from lobbyists. So there's going to be a lot of people not liking it simply because it's not good for them. And the only way to overcome that is to really do what every major movement throughout history has done, which is to stand up and demand your rights. And if you stand up loud enough and long enough, and that's true whether it was the right to vote or the Civil Rights Act or same-sex marriage or the Americans with Disabilities Act or anything else, eventually the status quo has to give in. And that's what we have to do here too.
Bradley, we have our final question for you here. Your book concludes with a call to action for Americans to take the needs of upcoming generations seriously. How can decision makers who want to make better decisions for the future and young people who want to get more involved in the political system get more active with the push for mobile voting?
Great question. So the few things that you can do. So the first thing is, if you read the book, if you do want to check it out, it really tells you, I think, everything you might want to know about mobile voting. And it even includes ways to QR codes that you can scan to talk about it on social media and things like that. But here are the things you can do. One, you can go to mobilevoting.org and you can sign up to be a supporter and a volunteer. That might mean that when we're running legislation in the city that you live in, you could come out to testify, or you could call your elected official and tell them you want mobile voting to happen, or you could post about it online. So any of those are helpful. My TED Talk comes out. I'm not sure when this episode is going to come out, but we're recording this on July 14th. It comes out on July 15th, tomorrow. I did a TED Talk on mobile voting in April in Vancouver. And if you get a chance to go to TED and check it out and you like it, if you could post it elsewhere and show people like, hey, here's the argument for mobile voting. It's 11 minutes, so it's pretty concise. That would be incredibly helpful. There's a donate button on the mobile voting website. If you want to give money, that's great. I have put a lot of my money into this so far. I will continue to do so, but ultimately the fight of passing this in every single jurisdiction is going to take a lot more money than I have. So I'm going to need help from whoever I can get. And then also, look, my hope would be that once we're able to get mobile voting going and change the underlying incentives for politicians and they start working together again, we can get to actual solutions on real problems, whether it's energy or healthcare or guns or taxes or immigration or anything else. And then hopefully that kind of, to take us full circle to your first question, Puffin, starts to restore people's faith in government again, starts to restore people's faith in the system again. Right now, people don't have a reason to feel any real trust in the system because all they know is that everyone stands in the corners and points fingers and screams at each other and nothing gets done. But if they see that change, if they see their politicians screaming less and working together more and finding consensus and actually passing solutions that are common sense and make sense, that will give people more confidence in the system. And then my hope is that some of them will say, you know what? I'd like to be part of this. And they run for office or they go work in government somewhere. And that could make it even better. You know, when I speak about this at colleges now, no one really has any faith in government, and most people don't want to work in it. And I don't blame them, but we need to restore that trust. And my hope is that mobile voting is the first step in doing it.
We got about 90 more seconds, Bradley. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of the younger generations? And, you write about it in the book specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, this is ultimately only going to happen if Gen Z steps up and says, this is the way we live our lives. We want to be able to participate in our politics. It affects our future more than anyone because we're the youngest. And therefore, we deserve to be able to vote in a way that is logical to us, just like vote by mail was logical for an older generation and vote in person was logical before that. And if you don't want, for example, like Congress just passed the big beautiful bill, which added trillions of dollars in new debt. You're the ones paying that debt off, right? Basically, government right now, because you don't vote, just sticks you with the tap, right? And they keep effectively borrowing more and more money, putting off decisions today and hard choices, and instead just sort of having the benefit of doing whatever they want and spending all the money they want. And then the bill's going to come due, and you're the one that has to pay it. And the reason why they can do this to you is they don't fear you and they don't respect you because you don't vote, right? And the only way to change that is to vote and to vote in mass. And the only way to do that is to start taking advantage of the technology that we use for the rest of our lives. We use it for our finances, for our love lives, our healthcare, so many other things. And let's bring that to the way we vote too.
Bradley, that has been 5 questions. You've answered them in 5 minutes. We have just a few more bonus questions for you. This book is obviously a major achievement, but can you tell us more about another accomplishment that you're proud of?
Yeah, sure. I am really proud of the work that we do at my foundation on hunger. So we fund and run campaigns in state legislatures to mandate programs like universal school meals. And we have run over the past decade or so bills in 23 states that we've passed, 28 bills in total. About 13 million more people get food every day as a result of these programs. And about $9 million of my money has, through these campaigns, helped pass legislation that has unlocked well over $2 billion in new government spending for hunger programs. And that means kids who need food now get it.
Amazing, Bradley. Thank you so much for joining us on Books in Five. Again, the title of the book is Vote with Your Phone. I'll put a link to the book in the show notes, so definitely go and buy it. If you're not able to buy it, check it out from your local library. Bradley, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
The host of Books in Five is Bhavan Sudan. Books in Five is produced in collaboration with Podfather Creative in Vancouver, Canada.